Welcome to the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. I'm your host, FoodTech marketing expert Megan Thomas. FoodTech Stories features the leaders pioneering new approaches to technology, collaboration, and storytelling in the food tech and ag tech space. Food and agricultural changing, and fresh ideas and leadership are needed to sustainably feed the growing global population. Join us every other week as we talk to a founder, operator, or visionary in food and agriculture. Today, my guest on the podcast is Kathleen Alexander, and Kathleen is co-founder and CEO of Savor, a food tech startup. Welcome to the podcast, Kathleen.
Thanks, Megan. It's great to be here.
Well, let's start with hearing more about your journey to this point. What led you to your current role?
I have spent my whole career, certainly, but perhaps even my whole life, being very interested at both the beauty and magnificence with which humans innovate and build and invent things, and also the beauty and magnificence in the natural world and the tension at that interface. When I think about everything I've ever worked on, it's always been about trying to understand how we can thrive and be the most creative, ingenious, inventive, progressing version of ourselves as humans, while also preserving this amazing, beautiful world we get to live in. That has taken me many places, but specifically for my career, it has really looked at how do we actually use that innovative spark we have to help move our technologies to a place that are more sustainable for our planet. Specifically, a number of years ago, I got very interested in the food system and how there's just a ton of room for us to rethink how we use land and how we feed ourselves. Founding this very lovely company, Savor, I'm excited to share more with you about.
It's really an interesting juxtaposition that you presented there. And I think in food, emerging technology and nature or the natural world can be cast as opposites. You have to pick one or the other. And I love the idea of thinking about it holistically and how those can fit together. What led you to co-found Savor specifically?
My co-founder and I had, prior to founding Savor, created an incubator that's called Orca Sciences. This sort of is positioned to look across technology and kind of look for gaps where there may be opportunities that not very many other people are thinking about that can really move our species forward. Savor was one of kind of 100 different ideas that we had in founding that incubator. There are a bunch of fun projects that the Orca team has pursued, but Savor really stood out as we were looking for gaps in the existing consensus around what our set of climate solutions are. I got incredibly motivated to actually go see, okay, is this idea of making food outside the bounds of our kind of existing photosynthetic paradigm, is that something that could even work? And if it can, how do we go build it? It started with a bunch of exercises on paper within that incubator that grew to real lab work, that grew to building a model for what would it mean to turn this into a company and go try to commercialize these ideas. Definitely top-down journey through trying to figure out where we can have the biggest impact.
So why fats?
I love this question, especially because I grew up in the 90s. And when the world was pretty sure maybe we didn't need fats at all, I was working pretty hard to remove them from the diet. But actually, fats and oils, besides being incredibly delicious and very important macronutrient with a lot of huge nutritional value, I'm really glad that we have moved past some of the misdirection we were thinking through in the 90s about nutrition and health. In addition to kind of being just delicious and important for our bodies, fats and oils actually have a really large footprint in terms of their climate impact. If you think about the food system overall, the food system currently uses about 50% of our planet's habitable land. It's responsible for about 70% of all the fresh water we use as a species. It's the major driver of deforestation and biodiversity loss globally. Within that, fats and oils are an entire macronutrient and actually have kind of an outsized impact. And one of the reasons for that are that some of the largest fat and oil crops that we use, like palm oil and actually increasingly soybean oil, are grown in tropical regions almost exclusively, particularly with tropical oils and palm oil. And so the impact on biodiversity and land use for these crops is just very outsized. from a climate and impact perspective, if you can make a difference in where fats and oils come from, the impacts are enormous.
Let's go deeper into your mission. How do you think about your mission?
Whenever possible, it's nice to ground in specifics. The kind of most specific and tangible version of our mission is that, first and foremost, we want to prevent future deforestation of every single remaining acre of forest on the planet. That's a very tangible mission, and we can uniquely address that because our process for making fats and oils requires almost zero land footprint. We can scale up our production of fats and oils to meet rising demand without the need for future deforestation. As we grow and as we continue to scale, we also may prevent the need of some existing agricultural lands that could let us actually rewild land area that we have had to deforest in order to feed ourselves over the last 10, 50, hundreds of years. That mission is really kind of tied to where food comes from and how we use the land, particularly focused on some of these most precious ecosystems that we have left on the planet.
Absolutely. So you have a background in materials science and engineering. I believe you have a PhD. So how does that inform both the work of the company and how you lead?
My day to day looks very different than my PhD in doing research in material science and engineering. Both the principles and the groundwork of having a technical degree and actually material science specifically are very core to the work at our company. I like to think of material science and engineering, right, is about all of the things that we make, right, are made up of materials. And in many cases, their properties are limited by the properties of those materials. How long your battery lasts, whether or not a bridge breaks, whether or not your computer overheats, all of these things are driven by the fundamental properties of the materials that we build with. So material science is about how do we make those materials better to push the limits, to push the boundaries of the things that we can design and make. We have this novel and incredibly sustainable approach to making fats and oils. If you think about how fats get made today, you have like photons from the sun, they land on a crop, the crop grows into some structure, and maybe inside its cellular bodies, it makes lipid molecules. We then extract those, we might feed them to some other creature. And ultimately, through this kind of like many long steps, we are extract photosynthetically produced triglycerides for the diet. What Savor does, we sort of ask the question of, could we make those molecules more directly? Do we need to start with photosynthesis and go through the growing of crops and the feeding and processing of those crops to get to these end molecules? The answer was, actually, we don't. We can start triglyceride. It's made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We have all kinds of molecules that are abundant sources of those, like carbon dioxide and water or methane in water. But Savor, our whole approach is about, in the most direct way possible, taking the starting sources of those elements and building them up into fats and oils. Along the way, you then get to choose how you've built them up. You get to choose ultimately, like, what are the properties of the fats and oils you want to make? And the things that differentiate a palm oil from a beef tallow or a milk fat, all of those are ultimately materials properties. There's a bunch of my core background in material science that winds up seeping into other parts of our company and how we are building and thinking about the products that we're making to improve the properties of fats and oils. Fats are actually an incredibly functional ingredient. They can carry flavor, they can provide flavor. They have this like set of thermal characteristics that give you this like experience of mouthfeel. They can play a role in shelf life. They can oxidize. All of those different things we get to design for. And so having a background and thinking about materials as things that we engineer has been a really fun part of building this company.
It's always so interesting when leaders take the rules and frameworks from one space and translate it over into another vertical. I think that's fascinating. So you talked about some of the ways that's appropriate and maybe similar to traditional material science. Are there any key ways that food is fundamentally different than the work you've done before?
Food really is made up of molecules and is like performing a functional role, preparing and cooking it, to the sensory experience you're having when you're eating it, to the biological experience you're having once it makes it into your body and is doing its real job, right, of providing you energy, and or the building blocks or the compounds themselves that drive all of your important biological functions. It is interesting to ask this question of like, is that cycle fundamentally distinct from how we would think about materials elsewhere. I would argue that it is not so different. I mean, biological systems are very complex, and so it's important to
Mhm.
understand those. It's important to understand the systems that all materials are designed for. I don't know that those are so different. The way we develop products and share them with people and get feedback has a wildly different constraint space than, for example, consumer electronics. But the actual design space and the constraints that live on the objective functions might not be so different.
I know there are others who are applying material science principles in food tech, so it's interesting to get a fresh take on it. Do you consider your company to be a platform or a product company?
Certainly both. I don't think I would be concerned if we were a platform without a product. I think it's very powerful to have products with a platform under them. We make fats and oils, and because we are really building them up from elemental building blocks, we have a very large design space that we're working in and can make ingredients that really span the whole space that we use fats and oils today. That can be, again, from something like a palm oil or a beef tallow replacement, all the way to some of the kind of more specialty places where you find some flavor that came from a fat molecule. That certainly is a platform as I'm describing it. It's not so relevant if you don't have individual products that are value added, that are truly desired out in commercial markets.
And what is your go to market strategy?
We are a B2B ingredient company at our core. That really is about producing fat and oil solutions for some of the largest food companies in the world. We have a number of different primary products that we've been developing for partners, including milk fat, a cocoa butter, as well as more specialty ingredients I mentioned, like flavors. The go-to-market strategy is very much around making sure those products that we've developed in those different categories are really bringing value and demonstrating the platform so we can continue to build at larger scale, access more parts of the palm oil spectrum, for example, that maybe sit further down the cost curve. An important piece of that go-to-market strategy is to also be out in the market sharing what we are doing. So we
Mhm.
have made a butter that we are selling to Michelin-starred restaurants and other really wonderful partners. Single Thread, for example, up in Healdsburg, has been serving our butter on their menu, as well as this really great collaboration with a restaurant in San Francisco called 165, where we made chocolate bonbons with them. We shipped out for the holidays, and those are still available in their store. We have a number of other food service and publicly facing partnerships, mostly centered around that butter, but the actual quantitative go-to-market strategy is a little bit deeper than just butter at restaurants.
Are you using those activities? Should we think about those as like proof of concept, or are you looking to gather usage feedback, or what are the key learnings you're looking to get out of those programs?
We're a couple years into the cycle with some of these partners. So early on, the relationships very much were centered around discovery. We have this new platform. It has a lot of bells and whistles. We can make all kinds of things, and really learning where is the strongest pull between things we can uniquely make and where a market need uniquely lies. We have always been kind of very relationship centered in doing that discovery work because, again, we have this broad capability set. And so we've really relied on the largest kind of food producers in the world to help guide us through what are their pain points, what is important for them in the space of fats and oils. Over the years, that work has transitioned from early discovery and mapping to really fine tuning. Here's an exact specification from a product you're looking for an alternate source for. Let's get to those exact specifications. Let's get into pilot trials and really work towards commercialization. So at this stage, we're definitely on more the commercialization side of that journey, but it has been very partner centered all along.
Okay, so you are looking to scale within the food service channel over time.
Exactly. Yeah. Both large CPG companies as well as some food service partners.
Is this a temporary thing to achieve certain goals, hit certain milestones? But no, it's really you part of your scaling process. So very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So, what's the most unexpected thing that you've learned on this journey?
One of the most unexpected things, which I is something that I maybe had the privilege of learning even before starting this, before getting started, is just how hard it is to do everything. you are just surrounded by marvels. There's this like famous story about how it's impossible to make a pencil. If you actually go and look at like all the things that must conspire for what pencil to be made, it's clearly impossible. Like it can't be done. And then you look and there's like so many thousands of pencils. Building a new technology is very much about like running that impossibility exercise. Every step of the way, things take longer and are harder than you want them to be, but you get to the other side and you've done something and you look back and it's like, wow, that was impossible and we did it. And you keep on going. And so maybe someday it will stop surprising me. For now, that has been a surprise. And then again, it continues to kind of just build my internal amazement at how on earth that we have managed to build the world that we have so far.
Is there anything that you wish you had known when you started on your entrepreneurial journey?
So many things. The building of this company has not been without sacrifices. It has definitely taken all of my life force in no uncertain terms. It is also an incredible privilege. What do you see when you look to the future of food tech? We both know that the sector has been really challenged in many different ways over the last 4 or 5 years. What do you see ahead? I continue to be so excited about the future. Certainly for the food system overall, there continues to just be incredible opportunity for us to make more sustainable and more delicious foods. The food system is one of the most powerful levers we have in working towards more sustainable existence on planet Earth. Savor is an incredible opportunity in that space, but there are others. Fats and oils are one piece of a broader food web. The combination of those things together is going to make for a pretty delicious and exciting future for us all. Even in just 2026, we are already starting to look at, we're at very small production, but we're already starting to look at how do we map every single ton of fats and oils we make to lands we can protect. We're starting to build those partnerships already and really watching in real time both our impact in making and producing food for the world and creating the true kind of conserved lands and rewilded lands that are the direct result of scaling up our ingredient platform is one of the things that I just can't wait for. I'm so excited.
Do you anticipate partnering with like land conservation organizations?
Yeah, there is such a beautiful coalition of people in the world today who have very aligned missions with us, trying to conserve lands, trying to rewild lands, trying to figure out how to create the incentive structures that enable that. One of the challenges that has existed in that space is that it is almost always required just kind of totally philanthropic, donation driven funding in order to make those changes. One of the value propositions of what we're building at Savor is we actually kind of change the balance of that equation. We, by again, having a method for creating food on almost zero footprint, you really start to change how we can think about monetizing conservation of lands. Historically, when you tried C groups, having tried to come up with frameworks for monetizing conservation, you've always run into the kind of global problem. Just because I conserve the forest on that hill, I have done nothing to reduce the demand of food. And so there will necessarily be a hill somewhere else that gets deforested. Closing that box has been kind of an impossibility. And by being the person that can produce food on no land, that suddenly flips the whole system on its head. It's a whole different problem than just trying to figure out how to make food with no land, but it's what we're working towards.
Since you become a substitute for the more extractive process that's been the law of the land, if you will, what's ahead for Savor?
We have really been transitioning into a scaling and commercial and growth mode for our company. So 2025 has been definitely a wild year. We launched our butter into the market in the spring and have been out in the world selling products and scaling up our factory in Chicago. 2026 will be kind of like an amplification of that, where the kind of smaller first laps of production we pushed through in 2025 are really scaling up in 2026. And in parallel to that, the business partnerships that we've been moving forward and developing bespoke products for our long-term impact are really maturing. For us, it's really about converting that momentum into all of the milestones that are required for us to then go out and build our first large-scale commercial facility. It should be a very fun year. I'm sure I'll learn a lot.
So if people want to find out more about the work of Savor, where should they go?
Savor.it. On our website, you can learn a little bit more about us, but also we have a journal there where we publish things from time to time. You can subscribe to our journal articles and our newsletter, which is a great way to see when we're launching in a new restaurant, when we have products that are going to be available. And then we try to update our social channels with that information as well. So we've got LinkedIn and Instagram and other places where you can find us.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Kathleen. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and keep an eye out for our bi-weekly episodes. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, founder of Ladris 17. FoodTech Stories is edited by TJG Media.